Bene, bene, eccoci qui anche questa sera per la sesta e ultima anteprima online degli EV Pro Days. Vi ricordo che c'è ancora tempo per registrarsi, infatti ecco qui il link per registrarsi all'evento di Trieste, che vi ricordo inizierà giovedì fino a sabato, per cui oggi concludiamo questo percorso online di anteprima che ci ha accompagnato in attesa dell'evento in presenza. Ci tenevo a ringraziare Letizia Vaccarella di Invisibile e dell'Università di Siena per essere con noi a moderare questo incontro, in particolare anche Yekta, Kalantar, Hormozi per aver accettato il nostro invito ad essere qui. So I'm switching to English just to thank Yekta for being here with us tonight. As I was telling before the live streaming, I think it's important that these types of lecture can be saved on our YouTube channel, also for students and researchers. After the live streaming, they can be there. So thank you, Yekta, for being here, and thank you, Letizia. So I'm going to give the floor to Letizia to introduce our guest today, and see you later. I'm going to be here, even if you don't see me. So thank you again.
So thank you, Andrea, and welcome. I am Letizia. I am a PhD student and a researcher at the University of Siena. As Andrea mentioned before, I am one of the co-organizers of Invisible, that is this conference, this con, this event that's been running in Florence for the past 2 years, and that is focused on intersectional perspective on the world of games. So games intended as board game, video games, LARP, and so on. Last year, we invite Stefano Caselli of EV Pro as one of our guests. So I think that this is the kind of revenge having me here and in this event. But yeah, anyway, let's go to the important part. So I'm here today to introduce the guest of this lecture, Yekta. So hi, Yekta. I just say something about the things that you do, because they are a lot and they are very beautiful and very interesting. Yekta is a researcher, a visual designer, and currently a PhD student. And she explores how, I can say, culture and video games are connected and inspire each other's. And she's developing a game design framework called the CultureCraft Model. The aim is to help game designer to incorporate properly cultural elements into games. She also works as cultural consultant for games. She collaborates in the title like 1001 Night from Ada Eden Group, and also 30 Birds from Ram Games and Business Goose. I hope I don't forget anything. And since last year, she's also in the executive board of DIGRA as a diversity officer. So today, as Andrea said before, is the last preview of the EV Pro Days, and we will talk about culture as a system. That is a word in very is a very vast argument, but yes, I leave the floor to you, and I want to thank you also for me to be here and to give us your time.
So please let me know if you can see my screen. Is that okay?
Yeah. I'm coming back. Yes, I'm here. So yes, we can see it properly. So
Okay,
everything is working.
Perfect. So hello everyone. My name is Yekta Kalantar Hormozi. I'm a researcher, as our colleague said, doing a PhD in media studies, and I study at Maynooth University. My focus is on game production and culture adaptation. I also teach game design and game art and so many other courses at TU Dublin here in Ireland. And I'm also a cultural consultant working on games like 1001 Nights and 30 Birds. So today I want to talk about if you are making a game based on a real world culture, how to make your player not only experience the culture through the aesthetical and narrative elements, but also reinforce them to think, to feel, to act if they are from that culture. So not only through the aesthetics, but through the mechanics, through the dynamics, and through the game logic. We're going to talk about that a lot later. So to do so, I'm going to talk about culture as a system and how to adopt it in game design process. So this idea of culture as a system came from my current research project at Maynooth University, where I'm developing a tool called the CultureCraft Model, an interactive tool for game designers to use when building games based on real-world cultures. So, okay. So while developing this model, I went through multiple stages of data collection. I analyzed several case studies on games that were based on real-world cultures, the successful ones, the ones that faced challenges, and they also went through different forms of cultures, let's say, different scales of cultures, and so on. Through this process, I conducted field work. I worked with multiple game development teams. I also interviewed experts from different stages of development, different scales of development, from smaller studios to big AAA studios, and also different roles in game development. So through these data collection, I understood that the misrepresentation of culture is not always done by intent. People do not want to be, let's say, always misrepresenting culture, or they're not doing it on purpose, at least not always. But there is other playing factors here that kind of results in a misrepresentation of a culture in games. One of these, or multiple these playing factors are, for example, production limitations. Sometimes due to development teams want to kind of be efficient, they kind of cut off some of the workload needed to be done in the research stages for the culture, because they are facing time restraints, they have maybe resource kind of limitations, and so on, that kind of results into simplifying the culture representation. The other playing factor here is lack of deep cultural awareness. So designers may not always realize the importance of exploring meaning beyond the, let's say, the aesthetics of the game. And another playing factor here is unclear creative boundaries. So video game production is a creative form of developing a kind of an idea. So the lack of clarity of where creative freedom the designers have, and what are the boundaries there, what the boundaries that they should not lie, kind of was another issue that came up, was so that unclearness of the creative freedom that they have. So these insights led me to develop CCM, or CultureCraft Model, that is not a rule book, not a checklist, it is a creative process model. So that means it encourages kind of ethical responsibility and creative freedom. At the center of it is the idea that making games based on culture should not only be fulfilling for the culture that is being represented and their specific needs regard to that, also the players' need of what is their experience while playing that culture, it should also be fulfilling for the game creators themselves. So as it is a creative process, let's say. So to simplify, the goal of CultureCraft Model is to create games that are ethical, that are efficient, and that are creative. So my goal today specifically is to introduce culture as a system to you guys. I will expand on that later on. And while doing that, hopefully inspire you as a game designer, if you are a game designer, inspire you to make games based on culture, give you some confidence to do that by sharing my knowledge, let's say, to you. And if you're not a game designer, maybe inspire you to become one and then make a game based on a culture. So that is my goal for today. So I want to give some notes, a small note. Throughout this presentation, I will refer to cultures that are based on real-world cultures as cultural games. So specifically, this means that. So if I say a cultural game, that means a game that is based on a real-world culture. Okay, let's start. So for understanding culture as a system, and later on translating that to game design, we need to understand some principles about culture itself. So that means, first of all, defining what exactly culture is. So while we're to define culture, we should understand, I'm going to read this specific definition for you guys. So we broadly define culture, culture as a group of people with shared experiences and perspectives. I want to emphasize two words here. One shared, one group. So culture is not about people, let's say, specifically from a region or specifically from a religious background or a nationality. Every group of people that have a shared kind of experience, perspectives, and so on could have their own culture. So that is one principle I want to emphasize here. Another principle I want to talk about is culture operates as a multiple levels. So we have national culture, regional culture, community culture, maybe family culture, and so on. So as humans, we belong to multiple cultures at once. For example, if we are designing a cultural game based on a fisherman in the late 19th century from Japan, who used to be a samurai, so they have multiple cultures here that we need to kind of look into while building our game based on their story. So in the 19th century Japan, after kind of the class of samurai was abolished, people went into other roles. So here, our main character belongs to the samurai community, because it used to be part of that. They have their own regional Japanese culture of 19th century. They are part of a fishing community, the fishing community. So again, they kind of have that layer of culture. And of course, they have their family traditions and so on. So remember, people do not have one culture. There are combinations of cultures, let's say. So this is important because these layers create depth and meaning. So understanding this complexity will help us avoid simplifying or stereotyping cultural identities, avoid us to create a stereotype, let's say, of a samurai while we're making a game. So be specific about these cultural combinations, or look into those cultural combinations as you are trying to adopt the culture. But I'm going to talk about that again later. So another key principle that I want to talk about is culture is not fixed. So culture is not static, it's not singular, but it's an ever-changing phenomenon. So people within a culture can change their behavior or practice depending on situations, yet still remain true to their core cultural values. I'm going to give an example about that. So, for instance, rooted in ancient Celtic fertility rituals, we have this event of a festival of embolic that was happening pre-Christianity time in Ireland. Later on, when Christianity came to Ireland, these belief systems of core values of fertility and their connections to spring and the crafting that comes with it got adopted to a new feast called the Feast of St. Bridget. So even though kind of let's say the material of the culture a little bit changed, but the core value stayed, and it was adopted to a new kind of setting here. So again, we are going through some principles of culture. I'm going to summarize that later on. Another principle of culture that I want to talk about is that as a designer, you're either part of a culture yourself, if you're making a game based on a culture that is outside of your culture. And the players that you're making that game for, or again, they belong to a specific cultural context. And of course, the culture that you're adopting is also belongs to a specific culture. So we have a conversation, a dialogue happening between multiple cultures here. The culture of yourself as a designer, the culture that you're adopting, and the culture of the player. So through this dialogue, we have a cross-cultural communication happening. This is again important to understand. Not what I always understand of a specific culture is the same for other people, or let's say the culture itself does not specifically sees or perceives themselves as the way I do. So that is important because we're sending kind of messages and meanings through our medium of games. But I'm going to come back again to this later on. So while thinking of the cross-cultural communication, I want you to think of this as one of your stages of development or production, and that is called positioning in my tool, cultural positioning. So when you are researching a game, I want you not only look through the facts or looking up kind of the material that you need to get inspired for the art and so on, or the story and the narrative. I want, before all of these, you guys to position yourself regarding to that culture. Ask yourself, where do you stand in relation to that culture? Am I part of this culture? Am I an outsider to this culture? What are my expectations? What are my assumptions? What are my biases towards this culture? At the same time, ask yourself, what are the expectations of the players of this culture? This could later on be a playing factor for your marketing strategies, or again, actually identifying maybe misrepresentations that exist in media about that culture. And also ask yourself, what are the needs of this culture? So what exactly this culture that I'm creating a game based on looks for or wants when we are representing them. So I call this stage of understanding your position regarding to the culture, the player's position, and the culture itself, cultural positioning. So that is, let's say, your first step when you try to make a game based on a culture. Okay, so let's summarize our short course on culture specifically. I'm going to later on expand on culture in games, but our short anthropological kind of approach to culture. That is, culture, first of all, is shared. We cannot, I did say something is culture, but you are, as an individual, the only person that is experiencing it. If you're sharing it with other members in your group, that will categorize as culture of your group. Another thing is that we are a combination of cultures, and also culture adapts to the context, so it's not fixed. And finally, when people from different cultures interact, cross-cultural communication happens. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to our second half of our presentation, and that is culture as a system. Now we're going to talk more about that. So I'm going to bring another definition here. So anthropology is kind of understand culture as a system of elements. So we have material, we have behavioral, and we have ideological that interact and reinforce meaning with each other. We're going to look through examples for that exactly. So just to kind of specify, when we say cultural material, we mean the physical artifact, the spaces, the technologies that people create and use in that culture. When we say practice or behavior, that means the actions, the rituals, the social habits, the way that they express themselves or express the meaning in that culture. And when we say ideology, that means underlining beliefs, values, worldviews that give everything meaning. So as you can already could guess, there is a kind of an alignment with a game design system here. So material, practice, ideology, let's say aesthetics, mechanics, and dynamics. But we can expand on that, but already we can see some alignments here happening. Just to again make you understand these elements of culture better, I'm going to give you a very short example. So looking at a cultural tradition like Japanese tea ceremony. So in Japanese tea ceremony, the materials that are being used are the bowl, are the tea whisk, are the kind of the interior design of the room or the space that they're sitting in. The behaviors, the way that they're sitting in, the way that they drink tea, the way that they interact with each other while doing that, and so on. And the ideology of it is rooted in Zen kind of Buddhist principles of harmony, of kind of harmony and tranquility and a purity and so on. So there is a kind of a level of material behavior and ideology related to a cultural tradition like this. So when cultural systems get fragmented, that is when exactly misrepresentation could happen and we get into a danger zone. So when we cut off material from the practice, from the ideology, that is where the meaning specifically wouldn't communicate or will be received by the person that is playing the game, let's say. I'll give you an example for this. So this is a scene from World of Warcraft from 2004. We here see a cultural material, but we do not see the practice associated with that material, and we do not see ideology. And that is something that resulted in appropriating this culture. So remember, fragmenting cultural systems will maybe distort meaning in that way. Another thing is that ideology can exist by itself. Practice cannot exist without an ideology, and material cannot exist with practice and ideology. So if you're using a material in a culture, remember there's a practice associated with it and an ideology associated with it. If you're doing a practice, let's say a specific gesture from a culture, with care, hopefully, remember there's an ideology behind that gesture. So just remember these kind of combinations. You cannot have one without another. I'm going to give you an example of culture as a system from a game that I worked on, and that is 30 Birds. So I worked as a consultant on this game, and I'm going to break a specific system that we had in this game. So in 30 Birds, the creator stylized Persian miniature painting, but kept its system. So Persian miniature painting that you see on the left side have its own specific structures. The lines are specific. The perspective is isometric. There's specificness to it. There is a sense of symmetry happening. There is a lot of details happening. It's seen from a top view-like view. The figure postures are all specific, and so on. So how the creators adopt this in, going back to the Persian miniature painting, also the practice part of it, we see the picture through walls as an observer. We see through the walls. we see everything at the same time. And the ideology behind that is that when we are looking at the miniature painting, Persian miniature painting, we are seeing it through the divine viewpoint. We are God and we are seeing the pictures. So God will see everything. God will see through the walls. God see everything at the same time. So the ideology and the practice and the kind of the materials here were adopted into the game and kept kind of the same system of structure. So in the game, maybe you will see a little bit stylization in the painting, but the lines were kept, the kind of the symmetry was kept, the details were kept, the body figures were kept, and kind of all the ideology of I am seeing everything from a God's view was also kept. And that created a proper culture as a system in the game design, that the meaning wouldn't be lost. So moving on to our level 3, so adopting culture as a system into game systems. So I am using the word adaptation specifically because game is not a neutral container. It's mechanics, it's feedback loops, transform whatever we put in. So our job isn't to represent culture like a picture or translate it like a text, is to adopt its logic into playable systems with care. So players can live the meaning of the culture rather than just not having a dialogue with it. Okay, so we're getting to a little bit of complexity here and more game design approach. So here, the thing that we could do to translate culture as a system into our game systems is to adopt cultural logic to a game logic. So just to remind, cultural logic is the system of shared assumptions and symbols and rules within a culture that shape how we understand the world. And game logic is the internal kind of rule structure of a game that determines how players' actions lead to outcomes and how enables kind of the player to understand, act, and predict within the game world. So I'm going to give you some examples of how to translate cultural logic to game logic. So let's say the concept of time. If we want to translate the concept of time, first we need to understand how people from that specific culture is understanding the concept of time. Shockingly, not everyone understands concepts same. Our cultural context impacts our worldviews. So the way, let's say, I as a person with cultural combinations in my context understands the concept of time different from you that you are from a different culture, let's say. So I want you, while you're researching your culture, ask yourself, for example, in relation to the concept of time, is time linear or cyclical in this culture? If it is, let's say if it's linear, we can progress step by step in the game. If it's cyclical, maybe we can return to the early stage of the game. Maybe as we finish the game, maybe we come back to the beginning of the game. If the culture kind of understands time as seasonal or event-based, maybe that again can translate into game logic in different ways. If it's event-based, maybe events trigger state changes in our game. Let's go through more examples. Let's say we could ask if our culture values doing one task at a time or values multitasking, and translate that in the game logic in a way that if it's doing one task at a time, maybe we can have sequences of quests for them to go. If they are multitasking culture, maybe we can have a main quest and multiple side quests for them to do. Another question regarding time. Let's say if the culture that we are basing our cultural game on is a short-term oriented culture. That means they are more in present or less thinking about the future. If they're on the opposite side, they're long-term oriented, that means they're thinking more about the future in some way. And we can translate that in a game. So let's say if I am adopting a culture that is from a long-term oriented culture, maybe I can constantly encourage the player to gather stuff, to collect inventory and other stuff for future battles, for the big boss fight that possibly is coming, and so on. If it's a short-term culture, maybe I can encourage the player throughout the game to explore, to take a moment to be present in the game rather than constantly trying to do the next thing. So I want to give some real-world examples of this. Let's say if I am making a cultural game about ancient Egypt around 10,000 BC, we're going to talk about some of the kind of the way that the ancient Egypt understands time. So for them, time moves in cycles. The sun rises, the sun sets and rises again, the Nile floods and returns, and kind of life renews. Another thing that is important in their understanding of time is the concept of renewal. We see this again in the way that they understand death, that death is just moving us from this life to afterlife. Another thing that is important in their way of understanding time is rituals. So they do rituals to balance or keep the order and maintain kind of the maintain the flow of time in their culture. So we can translate this in different ways. Let's say if there is a cycle specifically happening, maybe these cycles again are triggered by not time or timers, maybe by sun go down, sun going up, or the water go down or water going up, and so on. Or let's say if we want to kind of translate doing ritual to keep the order of time, maybe we can give the option of the player to push a specific button once in a while to kind of maintain the order, to always remember that they need to do that specific ritual. Or maybe throughout all of the quests that they need to do, maybe they need to constantly also remember to constantly go back and water their plant. So something like that to kind of convey that meaning and bring that into the game logic. Another example, let's say competitive gymnastics culture. So here, this is more a contemporary culture, let's say. They do long trainings for a very short period of time. They do routine as a specific way. It's not about time. It's about beginning, a middle, and the end. And when they strike the last poise, it's end of the kind of their routine. So we can translate that into the game by, for example, giving a high pressure situation, but very short event of time, and kind of having like a sequences of movements that they need to do with a preciseness and a rhythm. So another example of a concept that maybe we can, a cultural logic, and we can translate it to space, to game logic, and that is the concept of space. So for example, when you are researching your culture, ask yourself how this culture interacts with the space around them. Do they dominate it? Do they own it? Do they coexist with the space? Do they share the space? Do they do space shape them, or do they shape the space, and so on? So translate this in the game logic. Let's say if they dominate, or believe that they dominate the space, so that means you have like a world maybe that as a player I can go and kind of change the environment or destruct the environment. If space is a sacred place, maybe there's places that are unlocked and I cannot go there unless maybe something happens in the culture in the cultural game that I can. If let's say they believe the space shape us, maybe as we change our spaces throughout the game, new abilities get unlocked for the player. Another concept I want to talk about is progress. So progress, again, is understood differently in cultures. Let's say, ask yourself in your culture that you're researching, is progress measured? What is measured by? Is it measured by the amount of stuff you gain? So the more you have, the more progress you have made. Is it measured by something that you sustain? Is progress measured by a status that you reach, and so on? So translating that to the game culture. So if it's measured by stuff you collect, that would be how much stuff you have accumulate, how much stuff you have collect, how much stuff you have unlocked. If it's measured by, let's say, sustaining, maybe you need to sustain harmony in the game to go forward and kind of level up. If it's about measuring with the status that you reach, maybe it's about upgrading your role in your game. So you bring that logic into the game logic. So while doing that, I do want to again emphasize that we are from specific cultural context, each of us. And don't forget to constantly kind of cultural position yourself. Let's say if you think progress in games means more stuff to unlock, that is maybe due to the legacy of colonialism a little bit. Or if you think the more you collect, the more you have in your inventory, the more you're progressing, that could be a direct influence of the capitalist ideology that not maybe specifically will apply, let's say, to ancient Egypt. They won't have the same understanding of progress. I'll give you an example of this. Do you think, for example, in late Middle Ages in Italy, people did believe that progress is collecting positions? Probably not. Looking at, let's say, like cultural artifacts like the Dante's Divine Comedy, could understand maybe specifically about the worldview of that time. Maybe progress would be understood as like a discovery or transformation rather than collecting stuff. So remember, our definitions based on cultural context, it is important. Another example of progress, I'm going to specifically come up with give you an example of a game. Let's say I am building a game, a cultural game that is about craftsmanship in ancient times. And let's say I have a pathway, I can pick like playing the craftsman in ancient ancient Greece, or I can play the craftsman in ancient Persia, and so on. So for ancient Greece and ancient Persia, both of them, the concept of progress, even though at the same time periods, were vastly different. In ancient Greece, progress meant innovation, mastery, pushing boundaries, and so on. So if you want to translate that into game, let's say encouraging the player to become innovative with the kind of the tools and the mechanics that you have, and pushing them to kind of encourage them to become more creative with the tools, let's say, or the resources we give them. In ancient Persia, on the other hand, innovation was not valued, was not understood as progress. They thought progress as keeping the tradition, and they thought themselves as part of a bigger ecosystem, and their job wasn't for them to progress, to go ahead, as their job was to keep this ecosystem going. So let's say a good craftsmanship in their times would be someone that keep the tradition of their masters protected without any change and giving it to their students. So that would be understood as a progress. So let's say if I'm building a game based on that, that is, I would reward the player for precision. I would reward for the player for sustaining a rhythm, like, let's say, like a Tetris-like game. At the same time, kind of maybe even combining my work with other creators in the game, if it's a multiplayer game, to kind of be part of that bigger ecosystem. And at the end of the game, maybe you can teach your tradition to the next. So these were just few examples of cultural logic and how to adopt it into game logic. So there are so many other concepts. Of course, there's time limited. I cannot go through all of them. But I would advise you, while researching your games, look through the underlying cultural logic and understand, try to identify the cultural logic for that specific culture that you are adopting. While doing that, remember that culture is not a singular belief system. It's not a fixed identity. Cultures can change over time. They vary within themselves. Remember, we are combinations of cultures. So cultural logics are tendencies. They're not rules. So don't stereotype a whole culture. But remember, this actually is a potential, because we can use that or use the player agency to, again, to kind of express this fluidity. So my last advice for you is to base your design on research, not stereotypes. Focus on communities, not a whole nation. So be specific, create those layers of combinations of cultures. And of course, if you can, work with people within that culture or cultural insiders to have a better position towards that culture. So as I said at the beginning, the culture as a system is part of a bigger project that I'm doing, and that is the CultureCraft model. That is a practical process model. It's an interactive tool. So maybe it seemed a little bit of maybe a lot of things to think of as a game designer, but my tool here will help you kind of be practical about it, and will help you kind of incorporate this in your development process. So CCM is not done yet. I'm currently developing the beta version, but please have an eye for it if this is a concept that you're interested in, and be in contact with me whenever, let's say, the CCM will come in. I will share with you. This tool is a fully open source, just to make sure that we are sharing the knowledge to everyone. So that's me, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but first of all, really thank you, because I think that what you're doing is very important. It's something that we as a designer, as game designer, but also as player, we need. The idea of adaptation, I think, is very interesting, and just this word make very clear the idea that's behind your work. Now, so stop to create or sometimes reinforce stereotypes, but start to see culture and people and the representation for what they really are. I start with a difficult question, and then maybe we can also see the question in the chat. And this is difficult, but I think it could be very useful for people that design everything, not only games, of course, because I think that as designer, we always have an accountability, but sometimes we forget. We want to make something that maybe can entertain people, and we forgot that we see a lot of things in the things that we produce. So there is maybe a sentence, a question, but or maybe just only one word that we can say ourselves as a mantra, as a sort of mantra before we get started with the new project. So just one thing to remember us, that we are biased, that sometimes the tools that we use to do stuff, to produce stuff, are biased too, and we live in a difficult world.
Yes. Not only that. I mean, first of all, it's okay to be biased. We all are connected to cultural contexts, so it's we cannot run away. We have our biases is encoded in our understanding to the world in some form, because we do not fully understand every perspective, of course. I think first step is, as you said, accountability. So acknowledge that you're biased. Another thing that is, I think it's really important for designers, is to be transparent. Transparent about what they have done, what they have not, and that transparency will help the kind of the balance of expectations in some form. So I cannot be like, oh, I've made a game and I've done so much research, I know everything. That is lack of, you have not. So don't hide something, don't hide your process. If you have not done the research, be transparent about it, so people will adjust their expectations in some form. So accountability and transparency, I think, is very important as a designer. And again, it's okay to not know everything. But again, that is something that I'm learning through my research, that is bringing from the perspective of the designer specifically. that not knowing anything gives an opportunity for learning, and creative projects should be fulfilling. The fulfillment comes from different sides. If you're making a game based on a culture that is outside of yours, you're going researching and learning. And there has been research done about this, that this learning or knowledge acquisition is actually a fulfilling part for the designer. So don't be scared because I do not know, I cannot make a game. Actually, this is an opportunity for you to go learn and have a much more fulfilling design process, because you will learn, gain confidence, and kind of have a better understanding, let's say, about that culture and people from that culture.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I don't know if we can also see the question from Marco. Yes. In the early second games, the space between left and right is actually a continuum in which the character can move through the borders without a separation. What kind of representation does this resemble?
I'm not sure about the question of this, but I will answer something maybe in relation to this because it came to my mind. The left to the right perspective is a very a kind of English linguistic way of moving forward, and not all cultures will understand moving forward from left to right, and that is actually something that if you're adopting a specific culture, let's say that right from right to left, for them maybe forward means moving from right to left rather than left to right. So that is something that could be like associated with understanding of future, forward, past, that could be understood through writing, linguistics, and so on. And that would actually help with UI a little bit if you're creating, if you want to have like a cultural adaptable UI, let's say. I don't know if I answered your question.
I don't know, maybe Marco, if you want to explain better the question, we are here. And meanwhile, there is Stefano. And the question is, are there cultural logics that just cannot be translated or adapted? Or there are somehow just too risky to adapt?
Of course, there is some meanings that could not be understood maybe on some other cultures because they do not have the proper context. That's why it's maybe important to work with cultural insiders to understand those meanings. Because if you, for example, there is a specific, let's say, cultural logic that I do not have the context of to explain it beyond that. Maybe it's a very complex understanding. Maybe it's something that I shouldn't communicate or I shouldn't touch. Let's say I am thinking of like some stuff for my own culture. I'm trying to come up with some examples for you. But there is definitely, I'm sure there's concepts that you try to explain for someone in other cultures and you cannot because they don't have specific context for that. So let's say for cultural logic, for just to summarize maybe your answer, yes, there is some cultural logics that maybe we shouldn't adopt them because we don't have the proper tools to explain them.
And maybe in this case, the transparency that you're talking before is the key, no? I can't just adapt these things, but I declare it so people know. And there is another question from Matteo. Nowadays, we have a small industry of consultants and sensitivity readers, but aren't there limits in using consultants instead of properly engaging with communities?
I totally agree with that because, again, consultants come from their own biases. Sometimes, let's say, specifically because we're living in a multicultural kind of communities, sometimes, let's say, if I am consulting a game as a person from my own culture, I cannot deny that I am living in another country. So my culture is a hybrid culture. So now I have those understandings and I bring into my consultant and my perspective and my feedback that I'm giving. So I totally agree that cultural consultant is kind of a there is some biases themselves. That's why I advise the designers, let's say, to kind of maybe understand those biases themselves. So it's not only the cultural consultant coming and telling you this is right and wrong and you just listen. You gain that sense of deeper understanding, so you can also guide them because they're a team member. They're not like telling you what's right and wrong. It should be a conversation.
Yeah, and maybe this is also just the time in the middle. I think that the main goal is to have a so different community of people that develop their own games, that you can find all the information because you can talk with different person. But now it's very difficult to have all these people because the industry is still strictly closed sometimes. And I want just to link to this question to ask your own experience as consultant, because as Matteo said, we now have still start to have a sensitivity reader as a consultant to trigger warning and sensitive topic, of course, but there is a lot of resistance, and sometimes there are also people that criticize this sort of figure and maybe don't really understand why we need sensitivity reader. And want to ask you if for your own experience, is the same as a cultural consultant, or maybe it's a little bit better?
So cultural consultant is more coming from that understand. Maybe the sensitivity readers, I don't know. I can say this. So there has been time, like I was part of development teams and they have already produced their work. So as a consultant, I couldn't change anything. But at the same time, I can protect culture, people, and the designers. So as a consultant, I will come and kind of look through their work and see if there is places that they must change for, like, I identify like extreme red zones that they should not go. But if there is, let's say, things that could be different meanings could understood from that, maybe encourage them to go, instead of being specific, to become more vague, so they won't specifically let's say offend a specific group. So they will become more vague, and that in that way they kind of could protect themselves in some way. I will also encourage always the developers that the sensitive readers or the consultants are not there to tell you stuff. They're also there to help you. So help you as a way to, in case, let's say, something comes up, people say they're offended by something else. We kind of have documentations to defend ourselves in some way. And if we cannot defend ourselves, maybe then we can go back and change. So documentation is really important in that way. So it's not only about, okay, you cannot do this or not do that. It's about creating, let's say, a way to first protect ourselves for marketing issues. But I don't know if I answered that question. My mind went 100 places. Sorry for that.
Don't worry, and thanks.
Yeah.
And Marco specify, I think, his question. In some bidimensional games, the characters move to extreme right on the screen and exit on the opposite left, and vice versa, rather than blocking on the corner. So I don't know if you maybe are thinking about, for example, 30 birds that have this movement part in which the corner are active, so you can go around while walking. I don't know.
I don't know about the 30 birds the game specifically, because they were following the structure of a miniature painting and the rules that it came with that painting. They moved to another, let's say, dimensional, so constantly moving between dimensions in that way. But maybe to answer Marco's question, maybe we can understand that as a cyclical kind of behavior of like exiting and coming back, and maybe we can convey a specific meaning with that if it's associated with the culture. So there is definitely ways to get creative with that feature in some form.
And we can wait for other question, but I have just another one. Because you mentioned, for example, colonialism in game, and this is a topic that now we start to discuss in board game world. That is very common, of course, because a lot of board game have these mechanics, and the idea is that sometimes it's very difficult to think something different to make just the game works. But I believe that maybe the queer and transfeminine perspective on game can offer different lenses, no? Because the idea of deconstruct something and try to transform somehow, and this could be very useful to build different kind of mechanics, so different kind of games. So I want your opinion. If do you think that the intersection between activism and game design could serve a sort of a strategy for this cultural transformation?
Yes, I'm all about radical design. So all about bending or going against those patterns of, let's say, patterns that we have developed in game community that, okay, this is a specific way to do a mechanic, or these are the things to expect from a game. I think game as a kind of a medium is so new that there's so much space for us to kind of become innovative in that way. And I fully encourage, that is one of the things, is that to just fully encourage to become more innovative of the way the mechanics that we have or the game logics that we have, and actually go against the mechanics or the kind of the already set expectations, because not only because this could be wrong, right? No, I sometimes in the context it's the right way of doing stuff, but just to kind of make the experience of the player much more deep. We have the potential in game as a medium to deeper the experience. So why not do that? Why constantly go? I know why we constantly go through those similar patterns of creating game mechanics or expectations. It's for marketing reasons. But I do think that there is other tools to use to market our games, or other ways to frame our games. Even with an innovative mechanic, we can still have a good sale in some form. But yes, I totally encourage radical design, and that the only way to do radical design is to bringing those new perspectives to the matter, and kind of breaking the previous kind of structure.
And I think somehow you respond also to my last question, that is about the resistance. So why it's so difficult sometimes to integrate, to make things change, even we know that are for the good, into playable structure, but into game structure intended that's a whole system, no? Because as you say, we have possibility, and I always see the games as a transformative media, because we have a possibility that books and films and TV doesn't give us. That is the possibility to play something, to be inside something, and to have our own role, more or less active, but we make the world that we are playing. So the media is perfect for this transformation, but we see a lot of resistance. So which are, I think the market is the first one, and for your experience and for also the case studies that you analyze in your research, what do you notice?
As I said at the beginning of the presentation about, let's say, people do not have bad intent, that they misrepresent. It's lack of resources sometimes, and lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, or lack of just the perspective that they can do more. I think it's kind of the same for your current question. The resistance against, like, the kind of the not changing it's not always about I do not want to change, is that I do not have the resources to change. That's why one of the reasons I'm creating CCM, the CultureCraft model, is that if we constantly go and tell people, oh, you're misrepresenting, you're appropriating, you're doing this, you're doing that, but you are not giving their tools for them to do it in the right way, like that is not going to change. The resistance will get harder, and there won't be any kind of a change in that way. So we should recognize the bigger roots of the issue and try to kind of answer those. So the resistance comes from me as a designer, is that I do not want to add more workload to my already very long workload. I have deadlines to meet. I have so many stuff to think of. I cannot sit down and think of, let's say, game logic, a cultural logic, or so on. But that's why, like, I am creating a tool for them to be like, I am thinking of these for you guys, so come and use it. We're going to reflect through it, and we're going to kind of plan it over your game development process. So they won't be kind of resisting against that change. So the resistance, I say, comes from a deeper issue. We should identify that deeper issue and see how we can solve that.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if
I'm back. I was listening very carefully, and it was a very inspiring lecture, Yekta. Thank you very much. I think you have given us a lot to think about after the lecture, a lot of things, details. I want to watch again all your slides, because they were very rich and full of interesting details to study. So thank you very much. Also for being here, for accepting our invitation. So,
well, and also for inviting me.
Also for finishing our online previews and waiting for the in-presence event in Trieste. So thank you again, Yekta. Thank you, Letizia, for moderating this lecture. I'm just switching to Italian per ricordarvi che fino a domani sera potete registrarvi per venire a Trieste. Vi rimetto qui il link per vedere il programma completo e anche per trovare i link per registrarvi. Ci sono ancora alcuni biglietti disponibili, non molti, ma c'è ancora qualche biglietto per il 31 e per l'1, quindi se volete venire a Trieste potete ancora farlo. E grazie ancora, Yekta. Thank you, Yekta, again. And thank you, Letizia. E ci vediamo a Trieste da giovedì a sabato per gli Pro Days 2025. Un saluto a tutti e a tutte e buona serata. Ciao.
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 Ciao.